The millionaire's son was starving, and no amount of money or professional training could soothe him until the house cleaner, fueled by her own secret grief, offered him the milk meant for her lost child. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. The city bus, smelling faintly of diesel and damp cloth, hissed and shuddered to a halt in the affluent suburbs, the air brakes groaning against the silence. Elena Rivera stepped down onto the slick curbstone directly in front of the colossal iron gates of a high-walled residential fortress nestled in the foothills outside Los Angeles. The morning mist still hung heavy and chilled, refusing to burn off, and the rain from the night storm shimmered on the asphalt. Elena adjusted the grip on her frayed canvas shoulder bag. She took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the severe knot of black hair at the nape of her neck. "Just do your job well. Don't cause trouble," she whispered, the mantra tasting like dust on her tongue. "Don't give anyone a reason to fire you again." Today marked her first day working as an hourly domestic assistant for a man whose life existed exclusively in the sphere of glossy financial news and television interviews. Michael Cooper, 41, the tech entrepreneur whose billion-dollar startup had made him a household name among the elite. As she pressed the intercom, the automated iron gate slid open with a metallic sigh. A meticulously laid stone-paved driveway ascended gently toward a sprawling, angular glass mansion. A triumph of modern architecture standing solid and defiant on the hillside, commanding an unobstructed view of the entire city below. The massive glass walls caught the soft, hesitant glow of dawn, reflecting the deep blue stillness of a swimming pool that lay silent beside a garden trimmed with obsessive precision. Elena felt less like an employee and more like an intruder into the pages of an architectural digest. The main door opened almost immediately. A white woman in her 50s, tall and ramrod straight, wearing a stark white blouse and a severe black skirt, her thin-framed glasses perched high on her narrow nose, scrutinized Elena from head to toe, her expression unreadable. "You are Elena?" "Yes, ma'am." Elena managed a timid smile. "I'm Mrs. Harris, the housekeeper here," she stated, her voice sharp and controlled, though not explicitly unkind. "I will be assigning your duties. We operate on a very strict schedule. Come inside." Elena stepped across the threshold and immediately registered an uncanny quality. The house was deafeningly silent. There was no background television, no chatter, only the steady, impersonal hum of the central air conditioning and a faint, sterile scent of commercial disinfectant hanging in the cool air. Mrs. Harris began reciting the rules swiftly, professionally. "Your shift is from 6 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. Overtime may be required if Mr. Cooper requests it. The rules are simple. No photos, no social media. Do not enter Mr. Cooper's office unless summoned, and absolutely no noise on the second floor between 8 a.m. and noon." "The second floor?" Elena paused, her brows furrowing. "Is someone resting up there?" "The baby's room is on the second floor." Mrs. Harris studied her intently, ensuring the message landed. "James, 4 months old. He is extremely sensitive to noise." A sudden, fierce constriction seized Elena's chest at the word, baby. 7 weeks ago, she had buried her firstborn son, lost to a premature birth at 32 weeks. A tiny life that had never been granted the chance to see the world or utter a single sound. Her body had yet to accept this finality. Every morning, her breast still throbbed, heavy with milk, a painful, physical reminder, waiting for a hungry cry that would never come. "There's someone taking care of the baby, right?" she asked softly, almost hesitantly. There was. Mrs. Harris bit her lip, then visibly checked herself. "Never mind. Just start with the living room downstairs. Cleaning supplies are in the laundry room next to the kitchen." Elena started her work in silence, polishing the immaculate wooden floors, dusting the soft leather sofas, and wiping down the frames of abstract modern paintings. Everything was spotless, a perfect showroom display. She had cleaned many houses belonging to the very wealthy, but none had ever felt this cold. It wasn't the temperature of the air conditioning, but a profound, chilling coldness of human absence and emotional isolation. Around 8:30, a raw, piercing sound shredded the expensive stillness. A baby's cry, This was no ordinary fussy whimper. It was jagged, broken, as if the small throat had already been scraped raw by hours of effort, carrying with it a primal, visceral scream of despair. Elena froze, the bottle of glass cleaner suspended in her hand, her heart hammering wildly in her chest. The sound ripped straight into her unhealed wound. On the night she lost her child in that stark white hospital room, she had only begged, pleaded with the universe, to hear her baby cry just once. But all she had received was silence, monitored by the cold beep of machines. Now, James's desperate wail sounded like the echoing ghost of the child she had failed to save. Mrs. Harris hurried across the living room, glancing up toward the grand staircase, her face tight with agitation. "Not again," she murmured under her breath. "Elena, just keep working. Don't pay attention." "What's wrong with him?" Elena couldn't hold back the question. "The doctors say he's perfectly healthy." Mrs. Harris sighed, a sound of heavy resignation. "But he cries nonstop. They call it severe colic. We've tried everything. Changing formula, medication, white noise machines, vibrating cradles, specialist consultations, all completely useless." The screaming continued for more than half an hour. Elena scrubbed the marble floor harder and faster, trying to force her mind into the mindless loop of physical labor, but her stomach twisted and her eyes burned with suppressed tears. Close to 10 a.m., the front door burst open. A tall man strode in, sleeves rolled up past his forearms, tie loosened, his face hollowed out by pure exhaustion, a high-end laptop bag slung carelessly over his shoulder. Elena recognized him instantly from every newspaper photo. Michael Cooper. He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose deeply as the agonizing cries thundered down the stairs and throughout the otherwise silent house. "Again?" he almost growled, the word loaded with stress and fury. "Where is the woman who is supposed to be watching James?" "She's upstairs, sir," Mrs. Harris replied immediately. "She said she held him, fed him, changed him." But Michael didn't wait for the end of the sentence. He took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. From behind the half-opened kitchen door, Elena heard a young woman's voice, thick with frantic sobs. "I've tried my best, Mr. Cooper. He won't drink. He won't sleep. You're a professional nanny, and this is the best you can do?" Michael's voice was arctic, cutting through the baby's cries. "I am not paying 6 figures to listen to excuses. Please don't fire me. I just need more time." "James doesn't have more time," Michael snapped, his voice suddenly cracking with a raw vulnerability he immediately stifled. "Pack your things. This is the 4th time I have had to replace a caregiver due to incompetence." Moments later, a young blonde girl in her 20s, eyes puffy and swollen crimson, stumbled down the stairs, dragging a too large suitcase behind her, and fled straight out the front door without a word. Michael appeared on the second-floor hallway, James held stiffly in his arms. The baby's face was dark red, almost purple, his small body convulsing and jerking with every broken sob. His tiny frame seemed to curl inward, shrinking from an invisible, agonizing pain. "Mrs. Harris," Michael called down, his voice tense and strained. "Call the agency. I need another nanny here as soon as humanly possible." "Yes, sir." He began pacing back and forth along the hallway carpet, attempting to soothe James with awkward, heavy bounces, but his face conveyed nothing but desperation and profound frustration, like a man trapped in the middle of a house fire with no escape. His gaze swept downstairs briefly, landing on Elena, who was frozen in place, a cleaning cloth clutched tightly in her hand. "Who are you?" he demanded curtly. "I'm Elena, the new cleaner," she answered quickly, her heart thudding a panicked rhythm. "Do you have children?" The question struck straight into the most fragile, bruised part of her heart. Elena swallowed hard, her throat painfully dry. "I had one," she said softly, the past tense hanging heavy in the air. "But he passed away." Michael's intense eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a fleeting flicker of humanity, before hardening again into their usual focus. I'm sorry," he said, the apology sounding almost formal, obligatory. "Now continue your work. Do not concern yourself with James." Elena nodded, but James is relentless. high-pitched cry was already imprinted on her ears. All morning, that sound clung to her spirit like the wandering, desolate soul of a lost child trapped inside the glass confines of the house. By noon, yet another middle-aged woman arrived. The new nanny, sent by the agency, carried herself with brittle confidence, boasting that she had successfully managed over 30 difficult infants in her career. 3 hours later, Elena saw her again, walking slowly down the stairs, one hand pressed dramatically to her forehead, dark circles etched beneath her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cooper," the woman said, her voice shaky. "Your son. There is something not right about him. He is not like any child I have ever taken care of. The doctors said he's healthy." Michael snapped irritably, his patience completely evaporated. "Sometimes the problem isn't only physical," the nanny replied quickly, backing away. "He lacks connection. He's missing something my professional skills cannot provide. I don't want to continue and then be held responsible if something happens to him." And just like that, another one vanished. Which number nanny she was, Elena no longer cared to count. That evening, on the bus ride back to her small, rented room, Elena leaned her head against the cool glass window. James's crying still echoed relentlessly inside her mind. She pictured a room on the second floor, a dim night light, a white crib, a tiny, red-faced body, a mouth wide open, crying for a specific kind of comfort that no one seemed to understand. It was just like 7 weeks ago in the delivery room, when her own son had been born, then taken away without ever letting out a single cry. On the second day, Elena arrived 10 minutes early. The moment she stepped into the manicured garden, James's wails erupted from upstairs, raw and hoarse, sounding as if they had been sustained throughout the entire night. Mrs. Harris stood in the kitchen, her face drawn tight with worry. "The agency said no one is willing to take this job anymore," she blurted out, wiping her hands on her apron. "They said Mr. Cooper's house file looks like a haunted house. No nanny wants to come here." "Haunted?" Elena stared at her, confused. "They're suggesting James is followed by a spirit or something ridiculous." Mrs. Harris waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. They're just afraid of being blamed for failing." The crying grew louder, more frantic with every passing second. Elena set down her bag and looked up at the ceiling, trying to pierce through the layers of concrete and marble. Michael appeared from the hallway, looking wrecked. His hair was disheveled, his t-shirt wrinkled, and the dark circles beneath his eyes were deep, profound trenches. He looked at least 10 years older than the polished image she knew from television. "No one's taking the job?" he asked, his voice flat. "No, sir," Mrs. Harris replied nervously. "They say it's too much pressure." Michael let out a hollow laugh, a sound full of devastating helplessness. He leaned one hand heavily against the counter edge and closed his eyes tightly. His son's cries thundered down the stairs, shattering every fragile shard of silence. Elena spoke up softly, hesitantly. "Mr. Cooper?" He lifted his head, exhaustion flooding his gaze. "What? Could you let me try just a little?" "Try what?" His brows knitted together in confused skepticism. I've taken care of my cousin's babies before, and..." She took a deep, steadying breath. "I once spent some time in the neonatal care unit. I know how to hold them, how to pat their backs, how to read their signals. I just want to try helping James." He looked at her as if she had just uttered the most utterly absurd suggestion imaginable. "You're a cleaner," he said slowly, emphasizing the word with chilling finality. "I have paid a fortune for professional nannies. And you?" "They have degrees," Elena replied softly, but with sudden conviction. "But they don't have the same wounds James has." His frown deepened instantly. "What do you mean by that?" "He lost his mother at birth," Elena said quietly, her own chest tightening painfully with the memory of loss. Only after speaking did she realize how reckless and intrusive her words sounded. Yet, Michael remained silent, staring at her for far longer than she expected. James's cries seemed to swell, crashing against the walls of the room. At last, Michael let out a long, ragged breath. "What if you make it worse? How could it possibly get any worse?" Elena met his gaze directly, her brown eyes unwavering. "Give me 10 minutes. If James doesn't get better, I will never go up to the second floor again." That was the extent of her courage. Michael said nothing further, merely turned away. "Follow me." James's room was sequestered in the quietest, farthest corner of the second floor. When the door opened, Elena stepped into a world of cold, unrelieved white. White walls, white crib, white curtains, a hum of a white air purifier. Inside the crib, a tiny, red-faced body writhed wildly, arms flailing. His hoarse wails still clawing their way out. Elena felt as though an invisible hand were seizing and squeezing her own heart. "James," she whispered. Hearing an unfamiliar voice, the baby's crying momentarily stalled for half a second, then resumed with renewed intensity. Michael stood behind her, arms tightly crossed over his chest, his face etched with tension. Elena stepped forward slowly, raising her hands with a silent, pleading question in her eyes. "May I pick him up?" Michael hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. She slid her hands beneath the thin blanket and lifted James. His body was feather-light, fragile, warm, trembling with every sob. She smelled sweet traces of spit-up milk and baby sweat clinging to him. Elena pressed James tight against her chest, one hand securely cradling his head, the other gently patting his back in the slow, steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. "It's okay. It's okay," she whispered into his fine hair. "Mommy's here. I know. I know it hurts, baby. I know." The word mommy slipped out naturally, unexpectedly, like a long-hidden spring finally breaking free from the earth. Her chest painfully constricted, and her milk glands immediately stung with the familiar ache of fullness, her body instantly recognizing the presence of a baby pressed against it. James was still crying, but the sound had already softened, shifting from a frantic wailing to a deep whimpering, and then quickly devolving into ragged, shallow hiccups. Minutes later, he was only sniffing quietly, his brow still furrowed in concentration, but his tiny hands were now gripping Elena's shirt fabric in desperate little fists. Michael watched the scene from the doorway, his throat tightening unexpectedly. For 4 months, he had thrown vast sums of money at every possible solution. Specialized doctors, machines, consultants, and highly paid nannies. But for the very first time, he was witnessing his son breathe calmly, peacefully, in the arms of a complete stranger. "How?" he whispered, terrified of breaking the fragile silence. "He's not just in physical pain," Elena said softly, her eyes never leaving James's face. "He's lonely. He needs someone to hold him without frustration, without tension, without the expectation of results. He feels everything." "But the other nannies held him too," Michael protested weakly. "They hold him with technique," she replied, her voice filled with a sudden, profound melancholy. "I hold him like I'm holding a second chance at being a mother." Her body trembled slightly as she articulated the deep truth. James pressed his face harder against her chest, his tiny mouth opening in a blind, searching reflex, the perfect, undeniable instinct of a newborn. His lips brushed against the soft cotton of her shirt, searching for a warmth and a source of nourishment he had never known. Elena felt a sharp, agonizing ache surge through her chest as her milk rushed in, a warm, unmistakable pressure. She closed her eyes, swallowing a shaky, silent sob. "He's searching for something." Michael frowned, completely lost. "What does that mean?" "It means he wants to nurse," Elena whispered, dropping her voice almost to a breath. "He's never been breastfed, but instinct still knows what he needs." The air in the sterile white room instantly grew heavy, weighted by the unspoken possibility. Elena knew she could not, must not say what followed, that her body still produced milk, that all it would take was lifting her shirt for just a few minutes. She bit hard on the inside of her lip, tasting copper. "I'll prepare some formula," Michael said, grabbing onto the rational solution. He looked visibly relieved to have a concrete task. "You hold him for now. When I come back, we'll feed him." He left the room. The door clicked shut softly. Only Elena and James remained. James squirmed, searching more urgently now, making small, restless, hungry sounds. Elena looked around quickly. No obvious security cameras were visible. The walls were solid white. The baby monitor in the corner was dark. She had noticed earlier that it was unplugged or out of battery. Just once, a voice whispered inside her mind. Once so the baby can be full. Once so your chest won't ache from pouring this milk down the drain. Her hands trembled violently as she sat down in the rocking chair, lifted her shirt, and unhooked the clasp of her bra. Her breast was tight, swollen. The nipple immediately beaded with milk the moment it met the cooler air. James, she choked out, tears blurring her vision. This isn't something bad. We're just helping each other survive. The baby latched on instantly, furiously, as if he had been waiting his entire short life for that precise moment. His tiny mouth was small, but the suction was surprisingly strong and confident. With every rhythmic swallow, his throat moved softly. His frantic crying melted away into gentle, satisfied breathing. Tears streamed down Elena's face, falling silently onto James's fine, dark hair. She had believed she would never again be able to hold a baby this way, never use the painful gift her body still carried. She thought the milk was only a cruel, ongoing reminder that she had failed as a mother. And now, miraculously, it was nourishing another child. You cannot replace your brother, she whispered to the baby, the pain and the relief intertwined. But you're giving me a chance to love again. Right from the beginning. Thank you, James. She didn't know how much time had passed when the door opened again. Quietly, Michael stepped back in, carrying a carefully prepared bottle of warm formula in his hand. He stopped dead in the doorway. Startled, Elena instinctively pulled her shirt down in a flash, managing to cover herself just in time. James had released the latch, a faint trace of milk still visible on his lips. He slept deeply and soundly on her chest, his face completely relaxed, his little belly rising and falling in an even, peaceful rhythm. Michael looked first at his son, then at Elena. I don't think we need the bottle anymore, he said, his voice husky and strained. He must be exhausted. That's why he fell asleep, Elena replied, avoiding his gaze, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. When a baby finally calms down, they often drift off like that. His eyes softened slightly as he looked at the peaceful infant. Anyway, thank you. It was the first time since her arrival that he had ever uttered the words thank you. In the days that followed, the frantic, stressed rhythm of the Cooper household began, almost imperceptibly, to change. Michael no longer hired a nanny. Instead, he offered Elena an additional hourly rate to help care for James after she completed her cleaning duties. Mrs. Harris initially objected, raising eyebrows about protocol. But after witnessing James in Elena's arms several times, quiet, placid, like a small, gentle river, she fell silent. Every day, Elena held James, rocked him to sleep, and whispered softly to him. At first, she tried desperately to keep her promise to Michael, only soothing him, never nursing. But every time she turned away from the throbbing ache of her full breasts and James's instinctive, hungry cries, it felt as if her heart were being brutally torn apart. The second time, then the third, and soon it became an absolute routine, a dangerous, intimate secret. Every mid-morning and early afternoon, she would carry James either to the secluded back garden, where a deep wooden bench sat hidden behind dense foliage, or into the massive master bathroom, locking the door securely. There, she would nurse him until he was fully satisfied, his eyes growing heavy with milk-induced slumber. James transformed with each passing day. His frantic, frightened gaze became one of quiet curiosity. The desperate screams that had once lasted for hours turned into soft coos, then fleeting, angelic little smiles. Michael watched his son in utter disbelief, as if witnessing a domestic miracle he could neither explain nor afford. I don't understand, he admitted to Elena one afternoon, his voice low with amazement. James is completely different. Maybe he's finally feeling loved, Elena replied, her chest tightening with the complex knowledge of the secret behind that miracle. You love him that much? Michael asked, his eyes fixed on the pure, radiant smile blooming on his son's face in Elena's arms. It's not just that he needs me, she said softly. I need him too. He fell silent. Her answer contained too much raw pain and too much undeniable truth for him to ignore. Just when everything seemed to have settled into this delicate, secretive balance, the real storm arrived. One Saturday morning, Michael's mother appeared. Margaret Cooper, with eyes sharp as polished blades and the severe bearing of an aging queen, swept into the house. My son, she said, embracing Michael with a stiff, half-hearted formality. I hear you're allowing your house cleaner to take care of James. Mom, Elena is not just a house cleaner, Michael replied, glancing toward James, who was smiling trustingly up at Elena in the corner of the living room. She is the only person who could do what 8 professional nannies failed to do. That is exactly what worries me. Margaret narrowed her eyes, surveying the scene. A complete stranger with such a powerful, immediate influence over my grandson. As she stepped closer, Elena stood up slowly, lifting James securely in her arms. Good morning, ma'am. I'm Elena. Margaret studied her intensely, as though examining her through a powerful magnifying glass. Thank you for helping James, she said, the thanks sounding conditional. But would you let me hold him for a moment? Elena hesitated, then gently transferred James into the grandmother's stiff arms. James stared at the unfamiliar, judging face, frowned deeply, his lower lip beginning to tremble. Margaret tried to coax him with a forced, unfamiliar softness. James, this is your grandmother. The baby immediately turned his head away, his little hands flailing anxiously, his eyes darting across the room, searching frantically for Elena, visibly uncomfortable. He isn't used to strangers yet, Elena explained awkwardly, stepping forward instinctively. Please give him some time, ma'am. Margaret immediately handed James back, her face hardening further. How interesting, she said, the tone dangerously cool. For months he screamed himself nearly to death in the arms of trained professionals. Yet he falls silent immediately in the arms of a girl of such ordinary background. The word ordinary was weighted with every possible shade of class contempt. Elena lowered her eyes, clutching James tighter. Michael frowned sharply. Mom, stop it. I'm only stating facts, Margaret replied coolly, then turned her full attention to her son. And here is another fact. I had someone investigate her background. Elena's heart lurched sickeningly. She felt everything. Her fragile hold on peace, her secret routine with James, slipping out of her grasp. Elena Rivera. Margaret opened a crisp folder of printouts. 28 years old. 3 former employers. One accused her of theft. One accused her of being too intimate with a separated husband. And one complained that she was careless and caused a child to fall. They didn't sue her. They only fired her. Margaret glanced up at Elena, her eyes piercing. Is that correct? Elena felt her throat go dry, the air choked out of her lungs. Those things weren't like that, she tried to explain, her voice a strained whisper. In the first house, the son hid the necklace and was too afraid to admit it. In the second, the husband only talked to me often, and his ex-wife blamed everything on me. The child in the third house climbed onto a chair and jumped down by himself. I apologized, but people choose the easier path. They blame you, Margaret concluded dismissively. And my son chooses another easy path. He believes you, Margaret said, her voice an icy chisel striking stone. My son is desperate. He is grieving the loss of his wife and struggling with a sick child. He clings to anyone who offers him even a fragment of hope. He is vulnerable, Margaret countered, her jaw tight. The air in the room thickened, suffocating. Elena clutched James tightly against her chest. Her head bowed, her slight body trembling with a mixture of raw shame and deep, agonizing hurt. A few weeks later, Margaret's darkest suspicions finally materialized, though in a manner far stranger and more unexpected than she could have ever conceived. To ensure her grandson's safety, or so she told herself, she had hired a private investigator, a former police officer, to trail Elena every time she took James outside the house. On the 4th day of the surveillance, the investigator froze. Peering through the telephoto lens from a discreet distance, she captured the scene. Elena was sitting on a secluded stone bench in a small municipal park, tucked away behind dense rows of trees. Her shirt was lifted slightly. James was pressed against her breast, nursing greedily, his small body utterly peaceful. The camera shutter clicked rapidly, capturing a series of sharp, undeniable images. Those photos were sent immediately to Margaret's private email. That evening, Margaret drove straight to her son's house, ushering Michael quickly into his study before firmly closing the heavy mahogany door. "You have to see this," she announced, sliding the illuminated tablet across the polished desk toward him. Michael looked down at the screen, and the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him chalky and shocked. Photo after photo showed Elena cradling James, her face often streaked with tears, James clinging to her chest as if he were an organic extension of her own body. The world tilted beneath Michael's feet. "She," he whispered, his voice dry and ragged. "She's been doing this behind my back. This is the undeniable truth," Margaret declared, leaning closer. "She is using your son, using your desperation and the pain of losing her own child, to engineer a biological bond that she hopes no one can break. It's calculated. Mother." Michael rubbed his forehead roughly, trying to push back the mounting dread. "James needs breast milk. And what exactly do you plan to tell the law?" Margaret snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "I let my house cleaner secretly breastfeed my son in a public park? Do you comprehend the magnitude of the scandal this would become? The sheer social and legal liability?" Michael remained silent for a long, agonizing period. Outside, the rich colors of dusk faded, and the dying yellow evening light draped a layer of sorrow across his deeply etched face. Finally, he pushed himself up from the chair and walked out of the study. Elena was in the living room, meticulously folding James's tiny, soft towels. James lay in the antique crib beside her, freshly fed, sleeping soundly and peacefully. "Elena," Michael called. His voice sounded profoundly strange, stripped of its usual authority. She looked up instantly, a faint, contented smile still lingering on her lips as she glanced down at James. But the moment her eyes met Michael's, the smile vanished, replaced by a terrible, sinking premonition. "Is something wrong, Mr. Cooper?" He walked over and placed the tablet on the coffee table, the screen already open and displaying the evidence. "Explain this to me." Elena looked, and the sickening sensation was immediate, as if her heart had plummeted straight out of her chest. Her hands began to tremble violently. She gripped the edge of the heavy table, fighting to keep her knees from giving way and collapsing onto the floor. Her voice was hoarse, barely a croak. You shouldn't have found out this way." "Then what would have been the right way?" he asked, not raising his voice an iota. Yet, each word was sharp, clean, and cut her like a honed blade. "How long have you been nursing my son?" "About 2 months," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Since the very first day I met James." He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. His chest rose and fell sharply, labored, as if he were physically holding back an emotional storm. "Why didn't you ask my permission? Why did you hide it?" "Because if I had asked, you would have immediately said no," Elena replied, forcing a bitter smile. "But James was starving. He wouldn't take the formula, he rejected the bottles. He looked at me as if he were begging for help, and my body was also in agonizing pain because the milk had nowhere to go." She placed a trembling hand over her engorged chest. "I never intended to steal your son. I only allowed us to help each other survive this terrible time." Michael looked at James, sleeping soundly, his stomach visibly fuller than it had ever been, his skin rosy and healthy. He recalled the endless, desperate nights he spent pacing the vast house with James screaming inconsolably in his arms, utterly unable to soothe him. He remembered the recent medical report. The doctor had noted James was finally gaining weight rapidly, and all his vital indicators were normal. "Do you understand how profoundly you betrayed my trust?" he asked, his voice low and heavy. "I do." Her eyes were burning with unshed tears. "Every day I asked myself, what will happen if he finds out? And every time James looked up at me with those big, needy eyes, I chose to keep lying for just one more day. You used my son as medicine for your own private wound, Michael stated flatly. Are you truly certain that the love you feel is for James himself and not merely for the image of the child you lost? Elena was speechless for a moment, the accusation striking deep. Then, she lifted her gaze and looked straight at him, her voice trembling but suddenly resolute and clear. If it were only an image, any baby would have been enough. But only James breaks my heart like this when he cries. And only James gives me this kind of profound peace when he falls asleep on my chest. I don't love a concept, Mr. Cooper. I love a little boy with a hoarse cry and little hands that always clutch tightly at my shirt. Silence stretched between them, thick and unbearable. But even so, Elena continued, tears finally gathering in her eyes. I was wrong to hide this from you. I accept whatever punishment you choose. Send me away. Sue me. Do whatever you must to protect your family. I only beg you. Please find someone else who can breastfeed James if you don't want me to do it anymore. He's already entirely used to breast milk. Stopping suddenly now will only hurt him again. That last sentence was like a double-edged blade that turned and stabbed straight back into Michael. He stood there, agonizingly torn between two opposing powerful forces. Morality, dignity, the constraints of the law, and the searing image of his 4-month-old son resting peacefully against the breast of a woman who had lost her own child, calm, tranquil, as if he were finally lying in his own mother's arms for the very first time. That night, Michael drove James to the pediatrician, Dr. Davis. The elderly doctor listened carefully, studying James's detailed weight chart and recent medical history, then looked straight across the desk at Michael. Do you want an answer addressing a legal matter? He asked gently, or as a father facing an impossible dilemma. Both, Michael sighed, running a weary hand through his hair. Medically speaking, James is receiving the absolute best possible care right now. Breast milk, essential skin-to-skin contact, and stable emotional bonding with a deeply affectionate caregiver, Davis explained, his tone even. Legally, yes, the situation is extraordinarily complicated, but I'll ask one simple question. Since Elena began nursing him, has your son measurably improved? Michael looked at James, who was sleeping innocently in the nurse's arms, his throat tightening with emotion. He has never seemed more like a normal baby, he admitted. Then so has the world, Davis shrugged philosophically. There is no such thing as normal in the face of tragedy, Michael. There is only what helps us survive terrible things. For James, right now, that is her. When Michael returned home late that night, Elena was sitting alone in the living room, nervously twisting the strap of her small shoulder bag in her hands. Her meager personal belongings were already packed neatly at her feet. She had prepared herself fully to be dismissed and sent away. He stood before her, a complex mix of anger and gratitude warring in his expression. I spoke with the doctor, he began. He said that James is receiving things that many other children, even privileged ones, never get. So? Elena lifted her eyes, her face caught between a fragile hope and paralyzing fear. I'm not saying I'm not angry, Michael said honestly, stepping closer. You took away my fundamental right to choose in a matter concerning my own son. She lowered her head instantly. Yes, I am deeply sorry. But if I force you to stop now, he looked toward James's silent room. The one who suffers the consequences won't be me. It won't be you. It will be him. Elena swallowed, choking back tears. If you allow it, she whispered, her voice barely audible, I will continue nursing James until he is old enough to transition fully to solid food. After that, I will leave if you wish. Music, I won't cling to anything. I promise. Michael was silent for a long time, contemplating the enormity of the risk and the necessity of the act. I don't want to turn James into an experiment, he finally said, his voice decisive. You will stay. You will nurse him, but from now on, everything must be absolutely transparent. No more secrets, no more hiding. And we will find a way so that your necessary bond with him does not become a crushing emotional burden for either of you. Elena finally broke into uncontrollable tears, this time tears of profound relief mixed with lingering pain. Music. Thank you, she managed to say. No matter what you choose in the future, I will always be grateful for this time, for this chance to help him. Time passed. James grew quickly, becoming chubby, bright-eyed, and laughing far more often than he cried. Michael gradually became a true part of those intimate moments. No longer avoiding his son out of paralyzing fear of the screams, he learned how to properly hold James, how to change his diapers efficiently, and how to expertly swaddle him in a towel, all under Elena's patient, gentle guidance. Some nights, he would stand quietly outside James's room, watching Elena nurse the baby. The warm, soft yellow light wrapped around their two bodies, creating a tableau that looked like an old, cherished painting. He was still the child's father, the man in charge, but he knew this one undeniable truth. That woman had given his son something vital that he never, ever could. One evening after James had finally fallen asleep, Michael stepped out into the backyard where Elena was sitting alone on the low stone steps, cradling a steaming cup of hot tea. "Have you ever—" "Music," he began, sitting down heavily beside her. "Thought that our story might be fundamentally impossible for other people to accept? Our story?" Elena repeated softly, a little confused by the phrasing. "You, me, and James," he elaborated. "A wealthy, grieving man who lost his wife, a poor woman who lost her child, meeting around a baby who simply wouldn't nurse. It sounds more like a sensational tabloid headline than a family." Elena gave a sad, wistful smile. "I used to think that too," she said quietly. "But when I hold James, I don't think about headlines or social judgment. I only think about whether he's full or not, whether he's comfortable." Michael looked at her for a long time, studying the contours of her face in the moonlight. "And when music you think about me?" he asked quietly, his voice barely disturbing the stillness of the night. Elena startled, her heart suddenly racing within her chest. "You are James's father," she said, clinging to that simple truth like a protective shield. "The one who allowed me to be here when I had nowhere else to go. Is that truly all?" He pressed gently, needing more. "You are." She hesitated, then whispered the truth. "A man who is trying harder than he ever admits. And music. Sometimes I feel lighter when I see you smile genuinely at James." He laughed softly, a low, genuine sound, then suddenly grew serious, leaning forward. "Elena," he said, his voice slowing, weighted with meaning. "I lost my wife tragically on the operating table. I lost my belief that I even deserved to have a family. But from the day you first stepped into this cold house, everything changed. Not just because James finally started sleeping through the night, but because this house, for the first time, started to sound and feel like a home." She stayed silent, her heart pounding wildly, terrified of what he might say next, yet strangely comforted by the possibility in his tone. "I don't know what people will think," he continued, his gaze steady. "All I know is that when I watch you hold my son, I feel an overwhelming desire for those two people, you and James, to stay in my life much, much longer." Elena turned away, her eyes burning hot with tears that threatened to overflow. "Don't say things you might regret someday," she whispered, fearful of hope. "A man like you, a woman like me. A man like me, a woman like you," he repeated gently, "are both just trying to survive the worst, most soul-crushing losses of our lives. Maybe we have the right to rebuild a family in a way others won't understand." For the very first time, he placed his hand over hers. His palm was warm, trembling slightly, but she did not pull away. Of course, Margaret fiercely opposed the idea when she finally learned that her son intended to officially bring the house cleaner, the woman she saw as a usurper, into his life. She threatened to cut ties entirely. Music. She threatened expensive lawsuits. She threatened to leverage the press to utterly destroy their reputation. But one crisp autumn day, Elena carried James, now old enough to walk and lead by the hand, to Margaret's stately house in Santa Monica. She knocked on the wrought iron gate and spoke with every ounce of quiet calm and dignity she could muster. "You may think whatever you want about me personally," she said, her dark eyes clear and honest. "But James needs you. He doesn't need a perfect grandmother or one who meets your arbitrary standards. He needs an adult who is willing to step down from her pride, sit on the floor, and simply play with him." Margaret looked at James, who was staring up at her intently, his gaze unwavering, then at Elena, at those tired, honest, yet completely unbroken eyes. She stayed silent for a long, heavy moment. At last, she slowly opened the gate. "Come in," she said stiffly, her resistance crumbling slightly. "That boy," she conceded grudgingly, "looks exactly like Michael did when he was little." A few years later, in the sprawling backyard of the house that had once been cold and silent, the joyous sound of children's laughter rang bright through the air. James ran in delighted circles with his little sister, the beautiful result of the late nights when Michael and Elena had struggled together to not just survive, but to truly rebuild their lives. Elena sat on the porch swing, her baby girl nestled against her chest, nursing contentedly. James ran over and leaned his head against his mother's knee. "Mommy, should I tell my little sister about how I used to cry all the time?" he asked excitedly. "You shouldn't brag about that, young man," Michael laughed, standing framed in the doorway, a warm, satisfied expression on his face. "But it's true. If it weren't for those days when you cried yourself hoarse, your father might never have met your mother, and your little sister might never have been born." Margaret sat on the veranda nearby with a cup of tea in her hands, quietly watching her two beloved grandchildren. In her heart, she admitted that she had been spectacularly wrong about many things, and she also felt profoundly grateful that life had been generous enough to give her a chance to finally make amends. Elena looked at the people she loved. The man who once believed he did not deserve happiness. The little boy once silently labeled a haunted child by his cries, and the precious baby girl who had fully stitched her broken heart back together. And she understood this deep truth. The greatest miracles do not arrive as thunder or sweeping rainbows. They come music as a long, endless cry on the second floor, a painful, unnecessary breast that had nowhere to go, and a desperate man's reluctant, painful nod of acceptance. From those small, fragile things, a true family was born. And this time, both she and her children were able to hear the beautiful, roaring cry of life at birth, able to live fully inside it before genuine, lasting laughter finally filled the house.